August 8, 1942. The waters south of the Solomon Islands shimmered beneath a pale Pacific sun. In the conning tower of the Japanese submarine I-25, Lieutenant Commander Meiji Tagami squinted through his binoculars, scanning the horizon for silhouettes of enemy ships. The Imperial Japanese Navy had ruled these seas for months, its subs and destroyers hunting Allied convoys like predators in an endless blue wilderness. Tagami's crew, veterans of early victories in the Pacific, laughed when they heard the Americans had begun using their so-called flying fortresses to attack ships. A bomber against a destroyer, a lumbering plane against the might of the Imperial fleet. Ridiculous. Slow, one sailor smirked, tapping his cigarette. Big target, easy kill. Another added, "We will see their fortress burn before it even reaches us." Laughter echoed off the steel bulkheads. They had reason to believe it. The Mitsubishi Zeros still ruled the skies, and Japan's convoys carried the lifeblood of the empire, oil, ammunition, food, through the South Pacific unchallenged. But beyond those calm waters, in the humid airfields of Espiritu Santo and Guadalcanal, the United States Army Air Forces were learning. At Henderson Field, maintenance crews worked under blinding sun and swarming mosquitoes. The earth shook as engines of B-17 flying fortresses roared to life. 4 massive Wright Cyclone engines growling like beasts, straining against their chains. Inside one of them, B-17E Swamp Angel, Captain William Bill Brannan ran a final checklist. His co-pilot, Lieutenant George Phelps, adjusted his headset. Sweat dripped down their necks as the radio crackled. "Convoy sighted bearing 041, moving north at 12 knots. Brannan nodded to his crew. "Gentlemen," he said over the intercom, "let's show the Navy what a flying fortress can do." The bomb bay doors opened with a metallic groan. The Pacific gleamed below, a blue expanse dotted with white foam. 10,000 feet under them steamed a Japanese supply convoy, 6 transports escorted by destroyers, bound for the embattled troops in Guadalcanal. For months, the Imperial Navy had run these convoys almost unopposed, slipping men and supplies through the night. But now, American intelligence had caught their pattern. And the B-17s, once thought too high and too slow for naval strikes, had been ordered to hunt them. The first fortress rolled into a shallow dive. Brannan's voice came steady. "Bomb doors open. Ready, steady, now." The air shook as a cascade of 500-pound bombs dropped free, slicing through the sunlight like falling stars. Below, Japanese sailors scrambled, shouting and pointing skyward. Anti-aircraft guns barked fire, their black puffs of smoke blossoming in the sky. One round tore past Brannan's left wing, rattling the fuselage. Another exploded dangerously close. Shrapnel pinged off the armor. Then came the impact. A deafening eruption split the sea as one of the bombs hit a transport dead center. The ship's midsection erupted in orange flame, water and oil spraying skyward. Brannan's gunner, Sergeant Frank Dale, shouted, "Direct hit!" Through the smoke, another transport was struck, its hull lifting out of the water before breaking in two. From the submarine below, Lieutenant Commander Tagami stared in disbelief. His periscope caught the sight of a burning cargo ship collapsing into the sea. He could hear the cries through the open hatch, smell the burning fuel carried by the wind. This can't be," whispered one sailor. The flying fortress they had mocked was turning the convoy into a graveyard. As Brannan's bomber pulled up, tracer fire chased them, streaks of orange light whipping through the air. "Hold her steady," Phelps yelled, gripping the controls. The fortress climbed through smoke and chaos, engines roaring against the wind. From below, a wounded destroyer fired its last bursts before vanishing in a plume of fire and steam. Over the intercom, Brannan's voice broke through the static. "They said we were too slow, too big, too easy to hit." He looked down at the burning wrecks below. They were wrong. The B-17s banked south, leaving a sea of black smoke and sinking ships behind. What began as a desperate experiment had just rewritten the Pacific playbook. The Japanese Empire had learned fear that day, but they would not admit it yet. In Tokyo, the Admiralty dismissed reports of the convoy disaster as unfortunate but isolated. The great Imperial Navy, architects of Pearl Harbor, could not accept that lumbering American bombers were now picking apart their lifelines in the South Pacific. But the men on the water, those who saw the sky ignite, knew the truth. September 1942, the Solomons campaign was entering its bloodiest phase. Guadalcanal hung in the balance, an island of mud, malaria, and exhaustion where young Marines dug in against relentless Japanese assaults. Every bullet, every rice sack, every drop of fuel reaching the island came through what the Americans called the Tokyo Express. Convoys and fast destroyers weaving through the night, bringing supplies from Rabaul to the front. And now the flying fortresses were waiting for them. At dawn on September 14th, rain clouds rolled low over the Solomon Sea. The air felt heavy, electric, carrying the scent of salt and oil. In the makeshift control tower at Espiritu Santo, Intelligence Officer Major Edwin Pope laid out reconnaissance photos across a table. Aerial shots showed a fresh convoy departing Shortland Harbour, 6 transports, 4 destroyers, their course straight through the slot. Their mission, reinforce Guadalcanal's starving garrison. Captain Brannan stood beside him, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the grainy photos. "You're sending us again, sir?" he asked. Pope nodded. "Yes, and this time they're bringing destroyer cover. You'll have maybe 15 minutes before the Zeros get there." Brannan exhaled slowly. 15 minutes is all we need. By noon, the squadron of B-17s thundered north, climbing into the turbulent air. Inside Swamp Angel, the crew moved with ritual precision. Navigator Tom Carver checked his charts. Radio man Jack Malone monitored chatter from Henderson Field. The gunners, Sergeant Dale and Corporal McKinley, swiveled their turrets, eyes scanning for glints of silver in the clouds. Then they saw it, the convoy. Tiny dots on the water at first, then clearer, lines of ships slicing through the ocean, white wakes trailing like scars. Brannan's formation split, each fortress taking its attack run. The Japanese lookouts spotted them seconds later. Alarms blared. Crews sprinted to their guns. The destroyer Yugumo began throwing up walls of fire, the black bursts filling the sky like ink blotches. "Flak! 9 o'clock!" shouted McKinley. "Hold formation!" Brannan ordered, voice calm but taut. Through the cockpit glass, the scene below turned surreal, geometric patterns of ships framed by pillars of smoke and water. Then the bomb doors opened. At 10,000 feet, the B-17s released their payloads. 12 bombs tumbled toward the sea. The crew held their breath. 5 seconds, Carver murmured. 3, 2, 1, impact. A Japanese transport erupted in flame, its bow lifting clear of the water. The blast wave rocked the surrounding ships. Another bomb landed near a destroyer, flipping 2 escort boats like toys. The air shook with thunder, the sky pulsing orange. Down below, panic spread. The once proud convoy was now chaos, ships colliding as they tried to evade, sailors thrown into the sea, screaming amid burning oil. Inside Swamp Angel, the intercom crackled. "Enemy fighters incoming, 12 o'clock high!" Zeros, sleek, white, and fast, dived from the sun. Tracer rounds streaked past the bomber's wings. McKinley fired back, his twin .50 calibers rattling like drums. A Zero burst into flame, spiraling into the waves, but another lined up behind them, guns flashing. "Tails hit!" Dale shouted. Brannan pulled the fortress into a climb, engines groaning. "Hang on, boys!" The B-17 shuddered violently. Holes tore through the fuselage. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cabin, yet the engines held. Brannan wrestled with the controls, sweat dripping from his brow. Over the intercom, Malone's voice broke in, calm and clipped. "Transmit position, mission complete, returning south." When Swamp Angel finally crossed the coastline of Guadalcanal, Smoke still trailed from her tail, but she made it back. Barely. That night the radio carried news across the Pacific. Japanese convoy destroyed in the Solomon Sea. 4 ships sunk, others aflame. The Imperial Navy's planners now faced a grim realization. Their lifelines were bleeding out, one convoy at a time. And for the submariners who once mocked the flying fortresses, the laughter was gone. Each day brought new reports. Transports lost, fuel gone, troops stranded. The sky itself had turned into an American weapon. By late October 1942, Japan's naval command was in quiet crisis. Convoys to Guadalcanal were disappearing faster than they could be replaced. The Americans, once thought incapable of mounting serious air power in the Pacific, had learned the art of attrition, and their weapon was no longer the carrier, but the long-winged giant they called the Flying Fortress. At Rabaul, staff officers gathered around a map of the Solomon Sea, the red markers of lost ships spreading like bloodstains. Captain Matsushita, a logistics officer, spoke in a low, strained voice. "Gentlemen, of 34 transports dispatched this month, 16 have failed to arrive. At this rate, Guadalcanal will starve within weeks." Across the room, an older admiral tapped his pipe against an ashtray. "Perhaps we have underestimated their heavy bombers," he muttered. The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Meanwhile, far to the south, the men of the 11th Bomb Group were learning just how much those numbers cost. Every sortie meant hours of brutal endurance. Long, monotonous flights over endless water, then minutes of chaos when flak and fighters erupted around them. Out of every 4 fortresses that took off, one often didn't come home. November 1st, 1942. A heavy tropical storm hung over the Solomons, lightning flashing across the horizon like artillery fire. Captain Brannan's crew sat inside Swamp Angel, engines idling on the rain-soaked runway at Espiritu Santo. The air smelled of fuel and wet earth. Ground crew huddled in ponchos, waving flashlights as thunder rolled overhead. "Convoy spotted near Bougainville," came the transmission. "Orders, intercept and neutralize." Brannan turned to his men. "We do it again, boys. One more run, then maybe, just maybe, we'll break their back." The takeoff was blind fury. Sheets of rain hammered the fuselage as the fortress clawed its way into the sky. Lightning flared outside the windows, painting the cabin in stark white flashes. Inside, the men said little. They all knew the pattern: fly, find, strike and pray to make it back. By the time the clouds broke, the convoy was in sight. 7 ships, weaving in tight formation, guarded by a pair of destroyers. The sea below churned with whitecaps, and the morning sun flashed off the ship's decks. Brannan dropped altitude. "We're going in low this time. Below the clouds. They won't see us coming." The attack began like thunder. B-17s roared in from the west, sunlight gleaming on their silver wings. Bomb doors opened in unison, and in seconds the sea below erupted. Massive geysers of water and flame rose higher than the masts. One transport disintegrated under a direct hit, its bow torn away. Another listed hard to port, smoke billowing from its holds. The destroyers fired wildly, their anti-aircraft guns spitting tracers into the grey sky. Inside the submarine I-31, Commander Tagami was again on patrol. He heard the distant thunder of explosions and turned his periscope toward the horizon. What he saw froze him: a Japanese convoy, his own supply lifeline, being torn apart by bombers so high they were almost invisible. Through the lens, he watched men leap into the sea, ships aflame, cargo spilling like blood into the water. He gritted his teeth. "Those damned fortresses," he whispered. The same planes he had once mocked were now the arbiters of death. His crew stood silent, listening to the faint rumble of bombs through the steel hull. By nightfall, radio reports from Rabaul confirmed the horror. 5 transports sunk, 1 destroyer crippled. The Imperial High Command had to face an unthinkable reality. Their surface convoys could no longer move through the Solomon Sea unchallenged. The Americans had found a way to reach them anywhere, anytime. The effect rippled far beyond the battlefield. Without supplies, the Japanese troops on Guadalcanal began to starve. Ammunition dwindled. Malaria spread unchecked. Soldiers ate tree bark and boiled roots to survive. Every ship that failed to arrive meant hundreds of men left to die in the jungle. In Tokyo, the newspapers remained silent about the cause. They spoke of temporary setbacks, of heroic endurance. But inside the naval ministry, officers whispered another truth. The fortress had cut the empire's arteries. For Brannan and his crew, the victory felt hollow. On their return flight, they passed over the wreckage, dark shapes adrift in the moonlit sea. Dale, the gunner, muttered over the intercom, "Never thought I'd pity them." Brannan said nothing. He simply watched the burning ships fade into the mist, knowing that each one carried men as young as his own crew, men who had once laughed at the idea that the sky could sink them. By December 1942, the Solomon Islands had become a graveyard of metal. The ocean floor was littered with twisted hulls, rusting guns and shattered crates, the ghosts of Japan's once unbreakable supply lines. The Allies called it Ironbottom Sound. Every day, new wrecks joined the rest. At dawn on December 12th, the sea lay calm, a sheet of liquid glass. Far above it, the B-17 Swamp Angel cut across the sky like a silver arrow. Inside, Captain Brannan's crew moved through familiar motions, though each man felt the fatigue of endless missions etched into his bones. Their plane bore the scars of months of battle, patched bullet holes, blackened rivets, faded paint. Navigator Carver leaned over his chart table. Convoy sighted 20 miles off Vela La Vela, 5 ships, 2 escorts. Brannan adjusted his oxygen mask, his eyes steady. "We'll go in from the east. The sun's with us. Let's make it count." Below, the Japanese convoy steamed in tight formation, unaware of the storm about to fall from the clouds. On the bridge of the transport Kyokusei Maru, Captain Harada smoked quietly, scanning the horizon. The crew murmured about how American aircraft seemed to appear out of nowhere these days, out of clouds, out of sunlight, even out of night itself. Still, they took comfort in their destroyer escorts. The sea had always belonged to Japan, until the heavens opened. The Bombay doors yawned wide. 8 500-pounders tumbled free, whistling through the humid air. Seconds later, the sky turned white with fire. One transport vanished in a single explosion, swallowed by smoke. Another staggered under 2 near misses that ripped its deck apart. Brannan banked left, bringing the fortress into another pass. Anti-aircraft bursts flared around them, dark flowers of smoke, each one a heartbeat from death. The intercom crackled with the flat voice of Sergeant Dale. "Tails clear. 2 zeros closing fast. High rear!" McKinley's guns roared, the twin barrels spitting flame. A zero burst into pieces, its wings spinning away like shrapnel. The other peeled off, trailing smoke. For the Japanese below, the attack felt inhuman. The fortresses did not dive like normal bombers. They glided high and silent, raining destruction from unreachable heights. Their engines' steady growl echoed across the water like thunder rolling in from the edge of the world. Commander Tagami's submarine surfaced 10 miles away, drawn by the explosions. Through his periscope, he saw hell, burning ships, sailors thrashing in oil-slick waves, smoke curling into the stratosphere. He lowered the scope and whispered to his XO, "Once they called us hunters, now we are prey." As Swamp Angel turned for home, her crew watched the inferno fade into the haze. The air smelled of salt and gasoline. Over the radio, other crews reported similar strikes. Convoys shattered, destroyers crippled, the Imperial Navy bleeding out one run at a time. The fortress had done what no ship could. It had conquered the Pacific not by ruling the seas, but by denying them to the enemy. When they landed that afternoon, the men staggered out of their bomber, exhausted but alive. Brannan lit a cigarette and looked toward the horizon, where the smoke of battle still lingered. Phelps, the co-pilot, spoke quietly. "They laughed at us, you know. Said we were too slow, too heavy. Brannan nodded. They're not laughing anymore. In the months that followed, the Japanese submarine force shifted to new duties, no longer hunting fleets but rescuing survivors, evacuating troops, carrying what few supplies they could through the night. The once proud arm of the Empire reduced to lifeboats in the dark. The B-17 had earned its new name among the enemy, the Angel of Death. And across the Pacific, a legend was born of men who took a machine once mocked as obsolete and turned it into a symbol of unstoppable reach. The flying fortress had done more than sink ships. It had strangled an empire. In the long twilight over the Solomon Sea, the waves still burn faintly orange, where oil seeps from the deep wrecks below. There, in the silence of the Pacific, the ghosts of those convoys drift forever. Proof that even the mightiest can fall when the sky itself becomes a fortress.